Well, 8 weeks ago, I fell down the stairs right back there and tore up my leg. And as you can tell, it's each week a little bit better. I actually am going to the doctor tomorrow, and hopefully she'll release me to do some physical therapy. But it's been a nuisance and a hindrance for 8 weeks. And I got to tell you, the minute that when I fell down those stairs, I remember that moment with crystal clarity. And it's amazing how in some moments of your life, it's like time slows down and you have all these thoughts rushing through your head in a matter of seconds. It seems like, how can your brain fire that fast with that many thoughts can all pop through your head in just a matter of seconds? Because as I fell and I landed, and I felt this sharp pain, and I heard this loud pop that was not good, that was not good. And I remember all these things flashing through my head. Oh, this is bad. This is not good. This is bad. Am I going to be able to get up again? Can I get down these stairs? Oh, this is bad. I better call somebody. I better call Janina. I better call somebody else on the staff. Oh, this is bad. Am I going to have to call 911? Am I going to have to ride an ambulance? Oh, this is bad. I'm supposed to leave for California tomorrow. I'm supposed to go to Comic-Con tomorrow. Oh, this is bad. This is going to cost a lot of money. I'm going to get a big bill for this. Oh, this is bad. Why today? Why now? Why, God? As you eventually get to why God. Why God? Why is this happening to me now? And we ask the why God question all kinds of times. And sometimes we ask why God to some relatively minor things. Now, this is semi-major. I mean, this isn't really minor, but it's not really major. It's semi-major because the doctors tell me eventually I'll be back to normal. Eventually, I'll be back to my normal athletic self. And I knew you would laugh at that. Normally, I'll be back to, the basketball court and jamming the ball down the hoop and all those things. Eventually, I'll be back to normal. So this is, it's a temporary hindrance and it's a pain, but it's not final. So it's a semi-major. But sometimes we pull out the why God at kind of minor times, Sometimes we pull out the why God like, oh God, why did you put me next to this crying baby on the airplane? Oh, why God? Oh God, it's going to rain during the OU game? Oh, why God, why is it raining today? Or, God, this is a preacher. God, why did you let it snow on a Saturday night? Why is there snow on Sunday morning? Don't you want people to come to church, Lord? Why did you let it snow on Saturday night? Sometimes we have the why God, and it's not really that major. Sometimes it's kind of trivial. But of course, other times it's not trivial at all. Sometimes we say why God because it's something big. God, why did that car come through the intersection and hit me? Why a diagnosis of cancer, Lord? Why is my company closing its doors and I don't have a job? Why could my child have gotten on drugs? Sometimes the why questions, the why God questions are for the big things. Now, as a pastor, I've been with families in moments that are the really why God moments. One of the things about being a pastor, and for as long as I have now, for going on 34 years, is you get to be with folks as a pastor, you get to be with folks at the high moments. You get to be with folks when the baby is going to be baptized. You get to be with folks on wedding days and celebrations and anniversaries and all kinds of really cool stuff. When you're a pastor, you get to be with families in high moments and in happy moments. But as a pastor, you also get to be there in your really, really rough moments. Some of you have heard me say, when I was in Ada as a pastor, a young mother and her 2 young children were driving back to Ada from grandparents' house in the middle of a heavy rainstorm. And their car veered off the road into a pond, and that young mother and her 2 young children were all drowned, leaving a man without his wife and his 2 kids. And I did my first and hopefully only triple funeral. And when I saw one full-size casket and 2 little caskets, that was hard. And when I sat with that father who'd lost his wife and both his kids, the why question was very real. Why, God? Why? Some of you know my first year here in Broken Arrow, after we moved here from Ada, my daughter Patty's really good friend, Caitlin, was kidnapped and murdered by an evil man. And I went back to Ada and did that funeral. And again, you're doing the funeral of a 16-year-old girl who was viciously shot. And the why question is there. Why? Why, God? Why? Now, along the way, I've sat with families in all kinds of situations. I've sat with families who've lost children to drugs or suicide. I've seen cancer eat away at people. I was a pastor in Oklahoma City in 1995 when the Murrah building was bombed and 168 people were murdered by a terrorist. I've sat with lots of folks who've asked those why questions. Now, those are big questions, and over the next few weeks I want to look at some big questions. And perhaps there's no bigger question than the why God question. Most of you know that before I went to seminary, I was a graduate student in philosophy at OU. And there was about 15 to 20 of us who were graduate students in philosophy back in the day. And I was the only Christian. Every other philosophy graduate student was an atheist. Every single one was an atheist. All the professors were atheists except for one. One professor was kind of an unconventional Christian. All the other professors were atheists. Every other graduate student was an atheist. And I was the only Christian. And periodically, they would kind of corner me, not in a malicious way. They were nice people, but periodically they would say, how can you believe in God, Larry? How can you believe in a God who would allow X to happen? How can you believe in God when this tragedy has happened? How can you believe in God when this evil thing has happened? How can you believe in God when this person has died, or this person has gone on a murderous streak, or this natural disaster has happened? How can you believe, Larry? How can you believe in a Christian when you see all this evil in the world? And of course, not just in philosophy rooms and lecture halls and discussions. I've known people who said, yeah, my brother used to come to church. My father used to come to church. My sister used to come to church until this evil thing happened, and they said, I can't believe in God. I've watched my family members suffer, so I can't believe in God. Because I can't believe God would let this bad thing happen. Now this is a big question. How does a loving God, how does a good God allow evil to happen? It's a question that people have been asking for, well, as long as there have been people. And the most honest answer in the face of tragedy, the most honest answer in the face of tragedy is, I don't know. The most honest answer when something horrible happens and you're searching for some sort of answer, the most honest answer is, I don't know. The Bible has this book called the Book of Job, and Job is suffering terribly, and he's at one point saying, why God? And really at the end of the book, God's answer is, there's so many things you just don't know and understand. I'm God and you're not. And I'm in a place to see things you can't see, and I'm in a place to know things you can't know. And my ways are higher than your ways. And that's often not a very satisfying answer, but I know in the face of tragedy, what people don't look for is a philosophy lecture. When people are suffering in pain and sorrow, they are not looking for me to say, well, this philosopher says this, and this philosopher says that, and this theologian says this. They're looking for a hug, and somebody to hold their hand, and somebody to put their arm around them, and somebody to cry with them, and say, I'm so sorry, and I love you, and I'm here for you. In times of tragedy, people really want to know that there are people who care about them, and people who love them, and people who will journey with them and walk through tragedy with them. And so, when you're faced with a friend or a family member who's suffered tragedy and evil, the best thing you can do is simply hug them and hold them and say, I'm sorry and I love you. And not try to say, well, here's maybe why this happened. Because we don't know. The Bible, this verse that we read earlier, where Paul talks about there are times that we don't even know what to pray for. Romans 8:26, in the same way the Spirit helps us in our weakness, we don't know what we ought to pray for. The Spirit intercedes himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. Sometimes in the face of sorrow, all we can do is offer wordless groans. So when you're right in the thick of it with somebody, when I sat with a father who had just lost his wife and both of his children, I didn't say, well, let me tell you some theology. All I could do was cry with him and tell him that people were there for him. But when we're not in the thick of it, there are answers. There are ways to deal with this question. There are answers to the question of how can there be evil in a world that God, well, if God's a good God, how can there be bad stuff? If God is a good and loving God, how can He allow there to be bad stuff? Because what people are really asking when they ask that question is, why didn't God make a world that was pain-free? Why didn't God make a pain-free world where everything always works, where no one is ever mean, where no one is ever sick, where no one is ever hateful or spiteful, where everything is always good and nice and fine and pleasant all the time? Why didn't God make that world? Why didn't God make a world that was pain-free? And the Bible tells us the answer to that question pretty much right up front, right in the Genesis stories. Now, when you read the stories of the creation and the Garden of Eden, some people take these stories quite literally as science. Others don't. I don't take them as science. I read them more the way I read Jesus as parables, as more symbolic stories. But however you read them, whether you read them literally or more figuratively or metaphorically, however you read those stories, the point of the stories is the same. The point of the stories is this: God made us in His own image. God created us in His image. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean, well, God looks like a human being. It means that God made us like Himself in that He made us eternal beings. Beings with a spirit. Beings with an eternal spirit, an eternal soul. We are unique among God's creatures. We have an eternal spirit. And the other thing that makes us unique, that makes us like God, is God made us beings, made us people who have choices, who have free will. God gave us the ability to make our own choices, the ability to choose good or evil. God gave us the freedom to choose, even to choose bad stuff, even to break His laws and break His heart. God gave us this free will, and that means we won't always do the right thing. That means sometimes people will make really horrible, horrible choices. Now some people kind of say, well, now, couldn't God have given us free will, but then make sure we never do anything wrong? Couldn't God have given us free will and still created a perfect world where no one ever sins or does anything wrong? And C.S. Lewis, the wonderful British author of the Narnia Chronicles, author of Mere Christianity and so many other great books, has, I think, his most helpful book he ever wrote was called The Problem of Pain, where he tackles this question head on. Why is there evil in the world? How does God allow there to be pain and problems in a good world? And so Lewis, in this not very thick book, in The Problem of Pain, Lewis kind of anticipates this question. Couldn't God have given us free will, but still made everything great and wonderful all the time? Here's what Lewis says about that. He says, God's omnipotence, and remember that just means God is being all-powerful. God's omnipotence means power to do all that is intrinsically possible, not to do the intrinsically impossible. You may attribute miracles to Him, but not nonsense. There is no limit to His power. If you choose to say, God can give a creature free will and at the same time withhold free will from it, you have not succeeded in saying anything about God. Meaningless combinations of words do not suddenly acquire meaning simply because we prefix to them the two other words, God can. We say, well, God can do anything. Well, no, God cannot do anything. God being all-powerful doesn't mean God can do anything. God cannot lie. Did you realize that? God cannot lie. God cannot lie because it is contrary to God's essential nature. Because God is the God of truth. So the things God can't do. One of the things God can't do is lie. God can't, people say, well, could God make a round square? Could he make something that's both purple and yellow at the same time? No, he can't do things that are just nonsense. And it would be nonsense for God to say, well, can't God give us free will and then make sure we never do anything wrong? No. That's logically impossible. And God can't do the logically impossible. We're living in a time where there are, you go to any toy store, go to Target, Walmart, there are a whole aisle of action figures. I've got a few of them that are bad memories. Back when I was a kid, we didn't have that. Back when I was a kid, you're a boy. Boys didn't have any choices. Of course, don't call them dolls because they're action figures. Back when I was a boy, there was G.I. Joe, and he was 12 inches tall. I didn't really like G.I. Joe. The only other action figure back in the 60s was Major Matt Mason. Most of you have never heard of him. He was an astronaut. There's Major Matt Mason in his moon suit, okay? This was from the early 60s, before we actually landed on the moon. There's Major Matt Mason. There he is with some of his space buddies, and there's an alien in the background there too. And I had Major Matt Mason, I had all of his buddies, I had the space station, I had those vehicles, I had all the stuff. And I'm an only child, so all the living room, I'd lay out Major Matt Mason stuff all over the living room. And I would spend hours having Major Matt Mason, go on his vehicle around the moon and fight the alien and man the spaceship and the space station and do all that stuff. I controlled everything he did. I controlled his every movement. Now, God could have made a world like that. God could have made us action figures. And God could have made sure that we always did exactly the right thing at all times. God could have made us robots. God could have made us puppets. And God could have created a world full of creatures that look like us that would never do anything wrong. Just like I controlled Major Matt Mason. God could have made a world like that. And it would have been a world where there would never be anything wrong because God would just be controlling little puppets. But God made the choice. And we can question that choice, I suppose. But God made the choice not to do that. Instead, he made the choice to make creatures that actually have free will. Which means we can make good choices or we can make terrible choices. God made this world, and people make choices all the time to kill each other. Now, God also made a world of natural law. God made a world where if you step off a cliff and it's high enough, you're going to die. Where there's laws of gravity and all kinds of other natural things. There's hurricanes and tornadoes and weather patterns, and the world is full of death. God made a world with natural laws, and people die. People die because other people are horrible. People die because of disease or accident, or because their car goes off the road in a rainstorm into a pond and they all drown. And that, again, is a choice. God made a world of natural law. And Lewis says this in the same book, in The Problem of Pain. He says, try to exclude the possibility of suffering, which the order of nature and the existence of free will involve, and you'll find that you've excluded life itself. If you say, well, if you have a world, well, let's have a world with no natural laws and no free will. He says, well, then that world is not really life. You say, but God, God is God and God is good. Couldn't God somehow beat death? Couldn't God create a world where death and pain and darkness and tears are excluded? He has. God has created a world where death and pain and tears and darkness are excluded. Jesus talked about this world, this kingdom, this house. And he says that we can all spend eternity there if we connect our lives to his life. If we connect our lives to the life of Jesus Christ, there is waiting for us a world that has no pain, and no darkness, and no suffering, and no illness, and no killing. And that world is the world that Jesus continually promises. Promises to his followers, promises to the thief on the cross, promises. Paul talks about this. And think about Paul for a minute. Paul, the Apostle Paul, Saul, who became Paul, before he was a Christian, actually had a pretty good life in a lot of ways. He was, the high priest had given him authority to arrest all these pesky Christians. And he was a pretty prominent Pharisee. And then Jesus gets a hold of Paul and says, you're going to be my guy. You're going to be my ambassador to the Gentiles. You're going to go spread the word about me all over the empire. And after that, Paul has all kinds of problems. I mean, Paul gets arrested multiple times. He gets put in the stocks. He gets chained up. He gets whipped. He gets beaten. He gets thrown out of one town after another. He gets spat upon. He gets lied about. He gets finally arrested and put on a ship, and the ship shipwrecks. And it takes him a couple, 3 years to finally get to Rome, where he sits in prison awaiting his own execution, knowing that he is headed for a beheading, knowing that they're going to chop his head off. And yet, when he's sitting in that prison cell, he is full of joy and optimism and happiness. He writes his most joyful letters from prison. Now, how could he be so full of joy and confidence and happiness when he knows that he's headed for execution, and when he suffered as much as he suffered? Because Paul understood that this life is not the end of the story. Paul understood that this life is an important and wonderful part of our existence, but it's not all that there is. He knew that there was waiting for him a reunion with Christ and with all who had gone before him. He knew that this life was not the end of the story. He knew that he had been created in the image of God and that he had an eternal soul. And that because of Jesus, he did not need to fear death. Instead, he said, I know that when I die, there is gain because I get to go be with Christ in the kingdom of God. Now, he's very frank about the fact that basically, if there is no resurrection, if Jesus didn't really rise from the dead, if all of this is untrue, if he says, if none of that's true, he says, it's pitiful. We're pitiful. We've suffered for nothing. That's where we're at 1 Corinthians 15. He says, if only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. That's a tough verse to kind of swallow. Because Paul is saying, if there's no resurrection, if there's no empty tomb, then everything I've suffered is basically in vain. I've suffered needlessly. And so have all these other people who've been martyred for Christ. He says, if there's no resurrection, if it's just this life, then we're pitiful. But then he roars back, but there is resurrection. He says, but Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who've fallen asleep. The resurrection is a reality. And then he says in the next verse, for since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. As in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. See, here's the thing. Here's the thing that separates Christians from every other person. Here's the thing that separates us as followers of Jesus from everyone else. Here's what separates us. Easter. The empty tomb. The empty tomb is what separates us from everyone else. Because without an empty tomb, without Easter morning, without the women finding that grave empty, well, then death is the end. Death has the last word. If there's no empty tomb, then death wins. But the empty tomb that the women saw and the apostles saw, and it was that several hundred people saw Jesus alive over a 40-day period. The empty tomb. And people who saw him then died for that truth. I mean, when people said, you didn't really see him, did you? They held to their death. Yes, we saw him. He's alive. The message of Easter, the message of the empty tomb means that death didn't win. Death doesn't win. And Jesus is not just the one person in history who conquers death. Because he lives, we get to live. Because he conquered death, we get to conquer death. Easter is the seminal moment of human history. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is what allows us to have hope and to realize that this life is not all that there is. Now, this life's important. It's not that this life isn't important. This life, however many years we get, is wonderful because in spite of some of the things we see, this is an incredible world God has created with amazing things and beauty. And this life has amazing things to offer us. We're not just waiting to go to heaven. This life is an amazing experience that we need to experience fully. Jesus says you can have abundant life, and that abundant life doesn't just start in heaven. It starts the minute you connect yourself to Jesus. You experience that abundant life, in this world. But this world is not the end of the story. You say, what about, how is evil? How can you allow evil? Well, think about the worst day in history. What would be the worst day in history? If we can debate what's the worst day in history, in terms of number of people who die or evil or whatever. But how about this for the worst day in history? Evil people murder the Son of God. Can you think of something worse than evil people murdering God's Son? I mean, God sends his Son into our world, and people not just murder him, but murder him with a torturous death on a cross? That's like the worst thing you can think of. Human beings murdering the Son of God. That's what happened on that Friday. And that symbol of the cross is what reminds us of what happened on that Friday. But that Friday is not the final word. Because on Sunday after that Friday, the man that they murdered rose again. And the best day followed the worst day. The worst day was Friday. The best day in human history was on Sunday. Something terrible turned into something wonderful. Something awful became something amazing. So the cross reminds us that death doesn't have the final word. It doesn't have the last word. The last word is, I am the resurrection and the life. Paul says this, and I believe he was right in Romans 8:28, when he said, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who can be called according to his purpose. Even in a world where there's bad stuff, I believe God is good all the time. And all the time, God is